Hi guys, Luton here, back from an episode of Below the Line. This is the show where I discuss a topic, you guys put your comments down below, and in the following video this week we look at your thoughts and comments from that discussion topic. Last time we were talking about, yet again, GDC and loot boxes. This was a GDC poll which was done with developers, and a lot of them left comments saying that they're actually kind of in favour of loot boxes, didn't know what all the fuss was about. Proxel says, in my opinion, these devs aren't naive. They know exactly what they're doing. This is a lot of money to be made, and it's frustrating to them that loot boxes weren't as accepted in the West. Although, let's be honest, people still do buy them, which is definitely the case. You look at like upcoming Battalion 1944 decided it's going to ram loot boxes in, although it's only aesthetics on there. But, you know, pretty shocking to have even indie games there like trying to jump on board, but that's a whole different kettle of fish. The whole "we are sorry we didn't get it right" from EA just seems like we're sorry we didn't get away with it. Yeah, 100%. I don't always mind microtransactions if it's cosmetic and you know what you're getting, but loot boxes, random drops are gambling. It's plain and simple. And yeah, EA actually made a big point in recently their sort of announcements of their financial stuff, and they were talking about how basically it's been shown that it isn't gambling. Sorry, you can play semantics, but people see it as gambling, and in my opinion it is. There's literally no two ways about it. It's gambling without any age restriction or oversight. Legitimate transactions are one thing, gambling is another, and so it should be taken out of games. Or there should be a process to verify someone, at least someone's age, although honestly I'd prefer if they just went in any games or the store was somewhere much less obvious. Destiny 2 is an example of being really on the nose with it, or the new COD. Everything is, they're just everything's so blatant these days. Stop integrating extra purchases into the game, never mind loot boxes. So yeah, in conclusion, devs know exactly what's up and have every intention to milk it as long as we let them. And I think, yeah, I mean, that's the bottom line. It comes down to the gamers at the end of the day. If you put your money where your mouth is when you're purchasing games and you actually stick to your principles, then eventually the message will get through. Okay, next up, Mr. Lesson Dave says, we have to consider that games by their nature are designed to be addictive. That is definitely the case. To keep you playing as long as possible. If you already have writers, devs, developers who specialize in keeping people interested in something, the next logical step in terms of profit is to charge people for being interested. It used to be sequels, then DLC, then season passes, paying in advance for DLC, onto loot boxes where people are essentially now paying to continue playing the game. It's the same craving for more content that's always been there. The only difference now is that publishers are pushing the limits of how frequently they can get people to cough up and minimizing the amount of work they have to put in to get people to do it. They're never going to say, that'll do, we've made enough money. There's always going to be something they'll try to implement to maximize profit. If it's not loot boxes, it will be something else. And again, yeah, you only have to look at stuff like I say, like CSGO and things like this, where they still have this whole thing of skins and essentially not so much the gambling anymore, but still just this kind of mentality of the addiction of wanting to get all those little bits and pieces, all those little things, the value which is placed on these things. And as I say, it's disturbing to see games like Battalion 1944, which is just coming up today, actually jumping onto that bandwagon, and you wonder whether people are actually going to make a point about making a stand against that, or that it's just going to fall by the wayside and become another one of those things. He says, I also think we need to be careful who we blame for this too. For the most part, I imagine the devs just want to make games. It's the publishers like EA whose sole revenue stream seems like it's to milk as much as money out of people's hard work as possible, and that is the problem. These guys are investing in a product and they expect a return. If the devs don't toe the line, the game doesn't get financed. Studios close, you end up with a bunch of out-of-work developers. This is the reason these mechanics are being shoehorned into games. The devs can't stand up to the publishers because their livelihoods are at stake. Can't say I blame them. Not sure that I would be willing to risk losing my job for the sake of telling my boss I don't like how they want things done. And that is exactly the trouble with publishers, and that is exactly why self-published games are becoming more and more of a thing. And there are plenty of companies, especially look at like Planet Coaster and Frontier, okay, and Elite Dangerous. Frontier, you've basically got a company, a developer, which is self-publishing its games and doing well at it. I think actually maybe not for the very large studios, but I think maybe sometimes now we have Kickstarters and companies that are starting up and they're publishing their games without publishers. Maybe there is a little bit of a sunset happening on publishers. Is it even going to be a possibility that publishers could start to go under because they just push things way too far, and you see developers start, or maybe developers get sick to death of it. Maybe developers actually genuinely get sick to death of seeing their games get ruined by these practices, and they think, you know what, fuck this, we're going to self-publish our games so we don't have to deal with it. You don't know, maybe that's a possibility. Also, last thing, Lesson Dave said he's not letting it go. The last thing he wants to speak of is that bacon fries are better than scampi fries, and that is obviously incorrect. Okay, next up, Porcus, who says, I'm pissed about Ubisoft adding loot boxes onto Ghost Recon Wildlands. It's true. I don't think that was one that anybody saw coming. I know Drewski was real pissed about that. And he says, despite me liking the game, you can't deny that it's shipped in a very incomplete way. I have to say, I don't know, I've not played it either. And he says, the issue has gotten a lot better, but not solved, and I'm sick of developers saying that making games is expensive, because I already paid like $60 for the game, and expansions are also $15 each, plus cosmetic packs that contain every single cool item. That also costs $11 each. I think this is the issue that people often have, is just the amount of money which has to be invested in order to feel like you're getting almost like a base experience. And I think the reason why people feel so irked by that is just because people have a lot of experience in playing games, so people do actually remember. You know, it's not like people just come to it fresh and be like, oh, well, yeah, this is how it is. No, people remember. People remember that this isn't the case. And there's plenty of other games where it isn't that case as well. And so, you know, people just use that as a point of reference. But, you know, if these companies can keep sticking to their guns and putting this stuff into it, there's a genuine real possibility that you're going to have plenty of new players coming in who just don't have any other experience, and they just think this is how it has to be. And then we're going to be screwed, because people are just going to accept it then and think like, oh yeah, this is just how things are. And we really don't want to be in that situation. Okay, Rob's back and he says, I looked up the survey, this is the GDC survey of those devs surveyed. 11% said they were looking to implement loot crates in their next game, and many of those said crates would only be for cosmetic items. That's the classic get out of jail free card right now. Also, that number includes mobile devs whose games we know use microtransactions at a higher rate. It's true, because the game's often free to play. 11% seems low to me. I don't know what the number was last year, but I think it would be higher. But again, perhaps people didn't want to sort of, you know, they're kind of doing that, even though it's an anonymous survey, they kind of feel that pang of like, I don't really want to sort of put my thing in. You know, who knows? Maybe they know for a fact that these stats and this survey is coming out, and they actively make a point of not wanting to put it in there. You know, it's just an anonymous survey. Like, who knows how accurate it is? He says perhaps Battlefront 2's Crate Gate has had a more positive effect on the industry. That's definitely another perspective of looking at it. He says, how could it not? Even non-gamers heard about it and were pissed off about it, I think would be fair to say. He says, I'm not feeling the devs haven't learned the vibe that you might be feeling, at least as far as PC console games are concerned. It's true, but again, it's surprising when you see devs saying that they're pissed off that, like, you know, people kind of overreacted around that or whatever, when it was clearly total bullshit. And also, by the way, if you didn't know, EA did say that they were going to reinstate that system of the kind of loot box progression element once they'd got the balance right, whatever the fuck that means. So they are going to be putting it back into Star Wars Battlefront 2, unbelievably. Like, can you imagine, like, some people who just decided to stick around in that game, and then they're still going to have to deal with this bullshit when it comes back in? It's just awful, like absolutely bonkers. And as I've said before, I've still got absolutely no respect or patience for any YouTuber or Twitch streamer or producer in general who tried to defend that nonsense with Star Wars Battlefront 2. Anybody that does is just a disgrace, basically. Unreal Arc says, if anything, these devs should know by now that it's not loot boxes themselves that are so problematic, but more the deceitful, manipulative way in which they are implemented into so many games nowadays. Again, yeah, let's just look at Star Wars Battlefront 2. They tried to literally go around the houses in terms of playing that whole situation down until they couldn't get away with it, and then they had to make announcements about it. Says the past 6 months have clearly shown this with the massive backlash against stuff like Star Wars Battlefront 2 and Destiny 2. Gamers are sick and tired of being lied to and manipulated into trying to buy microtransactions in what is basically a gambling system for stuff that might be next to impossible to earn otherwise in-game. This is only made worse when you notice that in years gone by, we had optimal skin micro DLC that was upfront and clear about what it was giving you. In my opinion, these comments about games needing loot boxes to be profitable is both idiotic and completely contradicted by the fact that stuff like upfront cosmetic skin purchases worked quite well for a lot of games several years ago, as people could trust that they wouldn't get screwed over. After all, it is better to have customers that trust the company making these games than to try and milk them dry with such crap. However, we must also take into account that the devs may have to say these things to keep the publishers happy, as it's unlikely they're going to want to risk losing their jobs over disagreeing with the way that the business is being conducted in the industry, and it'd be a legal nightmare for them if they were to leak who greenlit abusive practices in games. And yeah, again, this is something that other people have said. So he says, really all we can do to continue calling it is total BS. Dangerman says, frankly, I think the problem is that with season passes and expansion packs, people complained about the community being split up with expansion packs, season passes, and so on, and publishers and developers then decided on loot boxes. And again, I think actually from personal experience with EA, I think that probably is the reason why they went down that route, as well as some other things. He says, personally, my opinion is that with digital stores, if say, for example, for Battlefield, the retail price for the full game could be more than $60 US, making it easier, but both single player, I don't know what you mean by making it easier, but both single player and multiplayer can be split up on the digital storefronts. I'd pay $6,100 US for Battlefield multiplayer, honestly, if it meant minimal to no transactions with a load of content post-launch for free, instead of cramming everything into a $60 season pass or $60 with loot boxes and minimal post-launch content, relying on them whales to post YouTube videos of opening 100 whales, people that spend a lot of money on crates and stuff, opening hundreds of boxes which get thousands of views. Games development is expensive, but I'd rather if developers were more honest to the customer about the cost of development, but also given the option of, if you don't like single player or multiplayer component, you can buy either one for a fair price. And this is something which I have talked about before, this idea of, are we paying an accurate price for games? And it raised a lot of discussion. Now, I did actually reach out to Carl M, who you will remember was basically head of DICE for the longest time, and he actually said he was willing to speak to me about this issue of the pricing of games and in general what you might be expected to pay for games and the cost of development of games. So I may speak to him and see if I can get that down and see if I can get a bit of an interview, because I think that would be interesting. Because I have said this as well. I've said, like, look, if you are investing into a game which you intend to play solely for a significant period of time, should you be willing to pay more if it meant you didn't have to deal with all of this crap? If it meant, would you be willing to pay $100 for a game if it meant that you would get absolutely all the DLC stuff plus all of the unlocks and all these kind of things? You didn't have to deal with any loot box crap, etc, etc. I've seen many people say yes, that's the case, but I've also seen plenty of people saying that's out of my price range, and also I wouldn't want to pay that much for just a game, and plenty of people saying you shouldn't have to pay that much because, in the past we've been able to buy games where we did get all of the stuff that you're saying, but we didn't have to pay out that price. So that's, a contentious one, and I think it's a question which will keep coming up for a while for me anyway. Interested to know your thoughts about that too. So now we come to part 2 of Below the Line. This is the section where I post a new discussion topic and you guys tell me your comments down below. Next week we'll have a look at the best comments. And today I'm asking a simple question really, which is that ARMA 3 has been around for some time now. It's had significant updates along the way, as it should for a game that's just over 4 years old. However, you reach a point where the foundation is just limited and it feels as if that time is approaching for ARMA 3. So people's appetites are ready for something new. Now I've no information to validate it, but many people feel that a new ARMA title must surely be, if not already, in progress and at least being planned and discussed. So the question for today, what should we be thinking of when it comes to new features for another ARMA title? Now before you guys go jumping in with the obvious ones here, we want 60 frames, we want it to be more stable, and in general easier to set up and run multiplayer without tons of scripts and all sorts of know-how and what have you. Let's try and think more creatively here. What are some features or scenarios that you think would be really exciting? And also, what would you like to see the base game focus on? ARMA 3 is currently set in a near future scenario blending current technology with logical progressions, but could the next ARMA maybe go back in time or forward in time, or remain the same but transition to a focus on a different part of the world? Also guys, try not to limit your ideas with just something like, I want to see a snow-orientated ARMA, or I want to see a Middle East focus. Try to flesh out your ideas a little bit with some detail so that when we can come to those best comments, we can really get into the grit of it. Perhaps you want to see more destructibility, or maybe jibbing in character models with limbs flying off and more catastrophic vehicle damage, which doesn't then heavily also impact on frames. For me, one of the main features that I think the next ARMA should include is easier implementation of hosting and general server running. Currently, getting base features set up and all running isn't so easy for most people, and this greatly limits the ability for people to run, say, their own Zeus operations with friends. And again, it's one of those things where it's easy when you know how, but a lot of people don't have the knowledge that they need to be able to do that, and so it ends up with them relying on other hosted servers that they have to take part in. Now, a lot of details in the game are left to the community, and to a degree this is, I guess, welcome with it being a sandbox game, allowing people options to implement things or not run them in different ways. Really, what I think Bohemia should do to look with the next ARMA is ensure that missions, Zeus or otherwise, can be hosted much more easily for reasonable numbers of players in the region of say 20 to 30 people, and that those wanting the more detailed, larger scale experience can still run this on top. So if you're like a private server host, you can still do that. If you're a community, you have a lot of people, you can still do that. But if you're just a bunch of guys, like 10, 20 people that's just friends on Discord, and you want to have like some hosted missions and do this kind of stuff, you can set that up and run that easily without having to be a bloody genius. Now, there's a huge list of things that I could rattle off, but I think I'm going to leave that to you guys to bring your own thoughts in on this. I guess the final question should be, how much base content should a game like ARMA have? It's often true that mods make the game, as with other games like City Skylines, and there's a bit of a grey area when it comes to devs implementing systems that may be something, a modder has designed and the community agree is a good idea. Now, while it's a good thing to see a clever mod put into a base game so that everyone can have access to that straight away without maybe having to search or generally be aware of it, sometimes devs don't actually implement it as well as the modder, or in doing so they make it a conflict with the possibility of it being done any other way. So where do we sit with that? Should devs in a sandbox game do less to allow modders to do more? It's actually a pretty hard question to answer without wanting to be really idealistic and just say, well, they should put it in at the base, but also ensure modders can make their own way of doing it. That's nice to imagine, but we all know it just doesn't often work that way. As I say, it's a bit idealistic to just assume that just saying, I want the best of both worlds, I want it always to just have all options. It's like, come on, let's try and be realistic. So guys, ARMA 4, what's some of the main features and scenarios that you would like to see with the game? What is it that you really want to be brought in the next version of ARMA? I look forward to hearing your thoughts and ideas, guys. This is Luton. I'll see you next week for more Below the Line.